everyone, welcome to StormCrows TV, the channel where two lit chicks talk about all things reading and writing. I'm Emily.
And I'm Allegra. Today we begin our reading with A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. During this series, we will be reading 20-ish pages at a time, like 2 to 3 chapters, and discussing them from Martin's use of point of view, plot lines, world building, all that jazz. So please read along with us, and if you have any questions or answers to our thoughts, let us know in comments or via our social media.
So this episode we are covering the prologue,
aka Yikes Ice Zombies,
and chapter 1,
aka Lol What Ice Zombies. So M, who is the new reader, the experimental guinea pig in this endeavor. M, can you tell us what had happened in a new reader point of view?
I absolutely can. Okay. So, 3 guys, right? They're all decked out in black garb and varying degrees of drab to fancy. They're all watching because that's what they do, and that's who they are. One guy who knows what he's talking about goes, "Bro, they're dead people out in the woods. Hypothermia done got them." And the fancy dude was like, "Pixar didn't happen." So despite the 2 guys who aren't fancy telling him this ain't such a good idea, he puffs his chest and goes, "Onward." So, yeah, he's gonna die first. And he does, spectacularly. He goes down screaming for Robert after being killed by ice corpse wizards, but then he reanimates all mangled and shit, kills one of the other dudes, and then boom, the 3rd dude is suddenly having his head lopped off by a surprisingly young Lord Stark while his kids look on. Bran gets a lesson as to why it had to happen, and frankly, Stark makes a lot of sense here. But then dogs. Well, wolves. Well, dire wolves. The older son and the bastard find a litter near the dead mom wolf, and while the weirdos want to just kill them, the Stark Snow boys are like, "Nah, bro, not today." Jon gets super selfless about it, too, excluding himself from the fams because there aren't enough dogs for all the kids. But that's okay because he miraculously hears a 6 direwolf pup that doesn't look like the others and was kind of separate. And because Jon recognizes what a metaphor is, he claims that one. Good job, Jon.
So, just because I really am curious, what would you guess key characters are here or impressions of them as people?
Well, it's actually really hard to tell if we're just basing it on the prologue because all 3 of them die. But I start reading and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, these are minor characters. And yet by page 2, I was really invested in them somehow. Not sure how. Then they all died. And then Stark. Clearly the Starks are a big deal.
What did you think of this prologue and first chapter?
So I've been meaning to read this for a long time. And everyone's saying you got to read it. When I picked it up and started reading it, my first thought was, what's the big deal? I was expecting some sort of elevated speech because everyone goes on and on about how great this book is. I was comparing it to the classics of J.R.R. Tolkien and, almost Dickensian in a sense. And as I kept reading, I realized I was very invested in it. And I'm not sure when it happened, but it happened very quickly. And I guess there's something very engaging about the simplicity of it because, like I said, we weren't with the first 3 characters for very long, but I was emotionally attached to Royce when he died, and I was like, this isn't fun. That's not cool. He's a baby. How could you kill this baby? And I just basically told myself, we got to brace for that because if he can make you love a character in 2 pages, the big deaths are going to really wrench that knife in your heart. But he's really good with characterization. He's great with exposition. He doesn't hit you over the head with it. And from chapter 1, moving past the prologue, he's really good at getting in the head of a 7-year-old medieval boy. Yeah, he's kind of advanced for modern day 7-year-olds, but back then you had to kind of be more mature or you died. But the things that Bran noticed and the things that were important to him would totally be important to a child. And so I was very impressed by the end of, I'd say, the first 30 pages or so. I got it. I got why people are really into his narrative and his style.
Yeah, I had the same response. I remember the first time, long, long ago, Misty Moons, before when I first picked up this series, I actually picked up A Feast for Crows first. And then I started reading Doran Martell, and I knew I needed to know what the heck was happening. So then I was like on my phone, getting on Amazon and ordering the first book. And yeah, I did the same thing. Like I cared from page like 2 somewhere, and I still don't know how that happened.
It's admirable and yet sort of enviable. Like, as a writer, that's what you want. And somehow Martin took this thing that's super hard to do and he's made it look easy. So lots of props to him. And for anyone who's watched like our previous series, you know that we can get snarky and critical and stuff, but I honestly have nothing bad to say.
Yeah, I know like there are a lot of people who hate the prologue idea. There's like, you know, a lot of people in writing circles always say don't do prologues. But with this, especially with the Game of Thrones, especially this first prologue, I think you really need it for a lot of levels, because if you don't have the prologue and you skipped it, you wouldn't know for way too long that the ice zombies are real. And it sets up a lot of the cognitive dissonance that I think you need to have.
Where I weigh in on the prologue, no prologue issue is, as writers and as people who studied writing, we were told so many rules. And then as you get further and further in your study, you're told, well, these rules don't apply and these rules don't apply. And so I'd say in terms of prologue, it's just personal preference. I think you can have one if it serves the story, but I think that's also true for any chapter. If your chapter doesn't serve a story, don't have it. Don't put it in there. And if your prologue doesn't serve the story, don't have it. Don't put it in there. But I didn't feel like the prologue was out of place.
No, I actually like it, but I really like the kind of round robin cycle of jumping to a different character's head every chapter. So
That's what I'm excited to see. You were the one who said you really need to read A Song of Ice and Fire because you will like how he handles that. And so here we are.
so as I mentioned, Em has never read these before. I think you've seen a little bit of Game of Thrones, the TV show, and obviously you've been friends with me for way too long, and I talk about A Song of Ice and Fire a lot, but she's never actually read these. I, however, have run RPG games, been in fandom for 1,000 years. When we're about to take user questions, I'm probably going to end up talking a lot. I asked on Twitter and on Facebook about if anyone had anything they really wanted to hear discussed about specifically these chapters. I know one of these questions I will mostly be answering. My friends and our fellow Evernight author, Naomi Clark, asked me and to talk about the Direwolves. Did you have any specific thoughts about like the hammer of plot pointery that is the Direwolf?
I mean, it's very obviously convenient that they're at first the same number of direwolves as they were trueborn Starks, and then later Jon Snow goes and finds that white one and it's different and it was away from them, and it's like that's very much heavy-handed symbolism. Obviously the direwolves are symbolic of the Stark kids, but beyond that, beyond the foreshadowing of something wicked this way comes, I would definitely have to read more.
So the dead direwolf in the snow, that's the sigil of House Stark, the direwolf. The sigil of the reigning house, aka the dude who's for Robert, is Robert Baratheon. His sigil is a crowned stag. And the direwolf is dead in the snow with a stag's antler through it, and the men-at-arms and everyone around the Starks looks at it and goes, oh my god, that's a bad omen. And you've got the big mama direwolf dead and all of her puppies loose in the world prematurely. So you definitely have that level. What I've actually thought about is that definitely the powers that be probably meant the Stark kids to have the direwolf puppies, but this is an animal that has been told everyone has been extinct for 200 years or so. You know, it's become a thing of myth. It's like finding a dead unicorn. You just came from executing a guy who was telling you another form of unicorn was alive and well north of the wall. The other thing I was pointing out, or that I'm going to point out here, is that the direwolf is dead in the snow. I haven't seen one south of the wall in 200 years. How did something that big get through the wall unnoticed? It's the size of a horse.
Well, the 3 people who were watching the wall weren't there. I'm kidding. I know there's more. I mean, but that happens with walls. I mean, history teaches us walls are only as good as the upkeep.
And spoiler alert, we will get more into that later. Okay, so that's the first strike with the direwolf, and I will totally, Naomi, discuss more about the direwolves as we go on. I also think it's funny that it immediately humanizes the kids, because like the kids see puppies, and Rob, who's very mature, and John, who's very mature, like puppies immediately. And the only one of the teenagers who is a jerk about it is Theon Greyjoy.
Yeah, he seemed like a real winner. Theon seems like a sadist, like the kind of guy who would laugh if you fell downstairs.
Oh, yeah, totally. He is that jerky 13, 14-year-old boy. Like, he's horrible. Maybe he's older than that. I don't know. In my head, Theon is like 14 until further notice.
Well, in my head, they were all older.
It's really kind of a shock to the system to realize Sansa Stark is 11 and Robb is like 14.
And it all makes sense. But when you have Sean Bean on the cover of your book and he's Lord Stark, you don't expect him to be 35.
Yeah, I remember when they were first casting the show, my roommates and I were like staring at it going, man, that was a hard 35 years of living.
Now, it does say in the book that he looks older.
Yeah.
And again, medieval conditions. I mean, Sean Bean's not a spring chicken.
We also had another question from Septa Shayna on Twitter. Who is Waymar, scoundrel or hero, and why is he at the wall?
Dead. That's who he is and what he is. And I'm pretty sure that's the last we will ever see of him.
Yes. I'm about to go kind of tinfoily. Waymar Royce, I mean, obviously even M picked up, he is kind of an arrogant little lordling. He's super fancy outfitted. He's obviously from a higher social status than the dudes with him. Waymar is the third son of Bran Royce of Runestone. We find out later from Sansa that his dad actually escorted him north. They hung out at Winterfell the year before the story starts. Sansa, who is all of 10, was totes in love. We also know later on in the story that the second son is reputedly told says he has to make his own way in the world, and that he goes and serves Renly Baratheon. So it seems like maybe Bronzion basically has one son that's his heir. The next one, the spare, is kind of doing his own thing, and the third one they had to do something with, and he chose the wall. They were the Bronze Kings before the Andals came in the Vale. So they may well still honor the idea and tradition of the Watch, the same way Jon Snow does, and the Starks do in general. As for whether or not Waymar was a scoundrel or he took the wall in disgrace, I mean, his dad escorted him north. He is very fully outfitted, very kitted out for it, is very proud and wants to be his own, leading his own ranging party. And we also find out later in the series, Lady Waynwood's basis for suggesting that little Lord Aaron foster with Bronzion is partly based on the strength of the reputations of his 3 sons. So it doesn't make sense that Waymar is disgraced and at the wall. I think he probably chose the wall. Now, that said, it may be that the Royces wanted an ear in the north. Bronzion is around an awful lot of the big events in Westeros and throughout the series. Like, not front and center stage, but if you do a search for his name, he pops up around a lot of stuff that goes down. He also had to know Robert Baratheon and Ned growing up in the Vale, because he's one of the main lords of the Vale. My guess is, since we know he was in and around a lot, he probably was fairly close with Jon Arryn, who has been serving as hand to the king for all of Robert's reign. There's obviously some backstory in there that we don't get, and not even a spoiler for UM, because we don't get it. It's not there. But you kind of infer that these things are all true. So I would guess maybe he is there as kind of eyes and ears for his dad and Jon Arryn to check on what is up with Ned in the north. If they maybe have some suspicions about certain watchmen not being who they say they are, or the wildling threat, if you're wondering what I'm talking about, the Order of the Green Hand has a really cool video about the Grand Northern Conspiracy and how certain Night's Watchmen may be there under assumed names. Also, I would point out that when Waymar dies, the others, and this is the only time, by the way, there's no Night's King like in this show. Like, we never see the real others. We see the whites, except for here in this very specific scene. And there are 6 of them. And they come out and they Like, one of them duels Waymar, then they stand around and talk over the body for a little bit. So, what was so important? Who did they, like, were they setting a trap for Benjen Stark or a Stark? Because we also get a lot of notes that Waymar looks like a Stark. Dark hair, gray eyes. Were they trying to get Benjen? Were they trying to get someone else in the Night's Watch and they got this one instead? I think Waymar was just a really arrogant, obnoxious 17-year-old, 18-year-old child. I think he wanted to be a hero and kind of was for 30 seconds.
He really stepped up.
Yeah, I mean, he did not disgrace his father. You feel bad for him, especially when, Will walks over and sees his dead body. Man, that kid died hard. But yeah, I don't think he's a villain or anything. I think he was there possibly at his father's bidding to be their eyes and ears in the North.
You've read the whole story, and so it's like you're able to kind of do these tinfoil theories, which I can't wait to be able to do. But like, just from my perspective, it's like he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
And that's possible too.
Yeah. Had he not left to go find them and he had listened to the others, well, not the others, but the guys who were with them, it never would have happened.
It's interesting because, again, this is sort of like the Night's Watch are clearly fighting a war that they've forgotten they're fighting and they don't remember the rules of.
My geeky sort of comparison here would be like if you've played Dragon Age, like the Watch are very much like the Grey Wardens. They get conscripted, they could be criminals, but they could also be like, from royal families. And they basically do this blood rite. You have to survive it. And their whole point is, hey, we're going to wait around for an archdemon. And if that shows up, we're going to kill it. And then eventually we die. Generally, we die sooner than everyone else because of the blood poison. But I was getting really strong Grey Warden vibes. And so it was like, it's very possible that influenced that.
Yeah. I mean, that's not too far off with the Night's Watch are. Imagine if they possibly had started as Grey Wardens, but it's been 8,000 years of a game of telephone, and they've forgotten what they're waiting for. If anyone has like a favorite tinfoil theory about the whole Waymar Royce, the Northern Conspiracy, who they were looking for, if Waymar Royce actually led his men into another's trap, like, please put it down in the comments. Also, guys, if you want to hear more, please talk to us. Let us know. Comment, like, subscribe, all that junk. Oh, and next episode we're going to be doing Catelyn 1, Daenerys 1, and maybe Eddard 1.
I'm looking forward to it. Like, Daenerys Part 1 has been really hyped up by Allegra, and if it's not as amazing as she says it is, I will hurt her in ways that only George R.R. Martin can describe. As she said, like and subscribe. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook if you still have one of those. If you're my age, you probably do.
Our Facebook group is specifically 2 Lit Chicks. Definitely join the Facebook group. Come talk to us, share some memes.
And as always, have a lovely day. Bye, guys.
Yep. Bye.